Hi, Internet. It's Emily SW.
Sam.
And we are coming at you with a special Boxing Day edition of the Podcastle.
That's right.
Happy holidays. Merry Chrysler.
That's what?
That's a Vine reference. I'll have to show you the video. There's a Vine of somebody standing in front of the Rockefeller Center with the tree. And they just take a bunch of different angles of them saying differently. Merry Christmas. Christmas. Happy Chrysler.
You know, I never had Vine.
Vine
is just like predecessor to TikTok, isn't it?
Vine was funnier though because it was 6 seconds.
Oh, that's short.
Yeah, so I'll have to show you that Christmas Vine. But I think they're funnier because they had to be 6 seconds.
You really have to have your punchline in there snappy.
And a lot of it is very, like, millennial humor.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I've gotten distracted. Anyway, this is the holiday episode of the Podcastle. We are reading
a short story this time. Or, no, it's like a novella, right? It's a little long for a short story. It has chapters.
It does, but I think it is technically... We are reading, or reread, The Abbot's Ghost, or Maurice Traherne's Temptation, A Christmas Story, by A.M. Barnard, who was the pen name of Louisa May Alcott when she was writing, for lack of a better term, kind of salacious, trashy stories to make money. In my copy of the physical book, this story, it starts on page 211 and it ends on page 277. So I think technically it's a long short story, but it's not quite long enough to be a novella.
It's a novelette.
There was, in my short story book, when I took a short story class in college, the longest story we read was a Herman Melville's, was it Barnaby? I think Barnaby something. It's a very famous short story. That was long as it was so boring.
I don't know if Herman Melville was capable of writing short.
No, Herman Melville was incapable of brevity.
I have not attempted to read Moby Dick.
I have.
But Dad attempted to read Moby Dick. And he just couldn't.
Yeah, and that's been on my list, but
he said there were too many tangents.
That's the thing. I don't typically get along with American writers from that time period. Let's just say. Me and Nathaniel Hawthorne have beef as well. But anyway, so this is our Christmas special. Stay tuned. We will also be discussing some Louisa May Alcott thrillers and horror stories.
Yeah, let's talk about Louisa May Alcott because she is most famous for Little Women.
Yes, an extremely un-gothic story.
I was gonna say it's a far cry from anything that we talk about, which I've also haven't read.
I love Little Women. Oh, you should read it.
I know some things about it just from osmosis because, you know, it's part of the culture.
It is.
But I've never actually read it.
I love Little Women. Little Women is one of my favorite books of all time.
Wow.
Which I would like to reread it as an adult, so maybe that's something we can delve into. Because I have some inklings about why it was so formative for me, and those inklings have to do with gender expression. But that's the topic for another day.
Well, you said some of her more salacious stories, as in the multiple.
Yes. So Louisa May Alcott, before Little Women took off, she was basically trying to write for money. And the way she did this was she wrote very dramatic thrillers, romances, in short form to submit to publications. And the publications would pay her money for them, and they were very popular. So she had a lucrative career under a pen name of A.M. Barnard, to the point where, I've forgotten what the publication's name was, but she was so popular that the guy who owned the magazine was like, you gotta keep writing these. These are bank. So she was paying her bills for a long time under this pen name, because again, she didn't want to be known as writing these. They were kind of considered trashy, sort of Penny Dreadful type stories. They weren't considered to be of literary value. They were just to be read for entertainment. So they were very dramatic. There was a lot of romance and like soap opera type drama, very exaggerated kind of sexuality. And that was another thing. Louisa May Alcott, she had very strong heroines. So instead of having women be kind of these figures of like dainty or pure or whatever, she had these heroines who would do bad things and be kind of villainous, but also you're kind of rooting for them, or at least I am as a modern audience reading. I'm like, yeah, you go, queen.
So it's really funny because, like I said, I haven't read Little Women, but I have read a novel that was published posthumously, which is called A Long, Fatal Love Chase.
Oh, yes. I haven't read that one.
The reason that I got it was Mom had asked, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, classic Gothic novels. And Mom just went on the internet and looked up classic Gothic novels. And that was one that came up, and she was very surprised because she didn't know that Louisa May Alcott had written Gothic kind of stories.
Yeah, I think Louisa May Alcott was kind of ashamed of it.
That was the impression that I got reading, like, the introduction to this novel. Because it wasn't published during her lifetime. She kind of tried to hide the manuscript. And it was even within the past 20 years or something. I'd have to look it up. But it wasn't published until very recently, when the manuscript was rediscovered.
The collection that I have is called Behind a Mask, The Unknown Thrillers of Louisa May Alcott. And it has a handful of these thriller-type stories that she submitted to the magazines to make money, along with this Christmas story that we read. The interesting thing about this to me is that it has some scans of actual letters between Louisa May Alcott and the guy who did the magazines. She got paid $65.
Wow.
For the story called Behind a Mask. So she was very lucrative, but that's one of the things that really drew me to this copy of the book. I actually picked this up from a used book sale, and I was drawn to it because A, Louisa May Alcott, B, thrillers. And I was like, oh, I bet we could do a Podcastle about that. But this is a really cool copy because it has the letters, so you can see the correspondence between her and the publisher. She was ashamed of this, and also in the introduction of this, as with any good quality compilation, there's an introduction that gives you a bit of a backstory. She did not want people to know she wrote these. She was literally only writing them to make money.
She used a pen name because she didn't want anyone to know it was her.
Yeah, she did not want to be associated with these quote-unquote trashy stories. I could see the connotation of them being trashy. They're compulsively readable, though. Now, because I started reading this, I don't think you've read these aside from the Christmas one we've done yet.
Right.
But I've started reading some of the other stories, and they're very snappy. Salacious is a great word for it. So I started on Pauline's Passion and Punishment because it was the shortest story in the book. So I was like, let me get a feel for this. And there's Scorned Lovers. There's like a love square. Louisa May Alcott has these very complicated love situations where, and this is in the Abbot's Ghost as well, where it's not a love triangle, which we're very familiar with in the year of 2024. There's like 4 or 5 people. They're all just, one of them's in love with this one, and this one's in love with that one, and it's just very complicated. So I can see why they were so popular in these sort of penny dreadful publications, because it's juicy, it's drama, it's tea.
Yeah. And it's not like in 1866 you could just turn on the TV and watch a drama or soap opera.
Yeah, you couldn't just go on YouTube and look up, like drama channels and watch 3-hour-long videos.
I guess it just goes to show you that humans never change.
No. We love drama. And Louisa May Alcott, I think, is very good at writing the drama.
Whether she wanted to admit it or not.
Yes. And, honestly, get your bag. If I could make a living wage writing stories like that, you bet your bottom dollar I would be
You need
doing
to start writing, like, monster romance or something.
Yeah, I know.
That does very well.
The modern day equivalent of this would be writing monster, like, smut. Like, monster smut, or, like, billionaire smut.
Yeah.
Or, like, book talk.
Couldn't be me.
Well, listen, I've had that thought. Believe me. That's maybe a topic for another time. But anyways, getting back on.
We do have a zine.
We do. I wouldn't qualify our zine. I wouldn't put smut in our zine.
No. Definitely not.
Yeah, I agree.
Listen, I can't write anything. Maybe this is the problem Louisa May Alcott had. It's like, I couldn't write something like that and then, like, show it to my mother.
See, and that's the thing. I think that's why you have a pen name, right? Like, because I've had that thought. I would need to write the smut first, but I'm like, if I ever complete a smut story, I am going to find a pen name and I'm going to publish that and see what I can do with it.
But you can't have people in your I mean, friends may be okay, but not like your family. Your family can't know about that.
No, absolutely not. And no, suddenly they're like, oh wow, Emily, you've, how'd you afford that new car? Well, it's a mystery. I got a raise. I don't know what you mean. I definitely don't write smut on the internet. That purely hypothetical. And listen, maybe one day. Anyways. So that is kind of how Louisa May Alcott came to write these stories, was to make money. And so that is also why they're so drastically different from Little Women. When she published Little Women, it wasn't very well received. It wasn't very popular. But in the meantime,
a person's gotta live, and in order to live in this world, you gotta make money.
Unfortunately. And, I mean, she made it writing, so, like, good for her.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot more than most authors can say, is actually being able to make a living from writing, regardless of what that writing is.
That's true. I mean, just look at how many artists or how many writers don't get famous until after they die.
That's why the starving artist is the whole thing.
So we read The Abbot's Ghost, which is billed as a Christmas story. And I guess, I mean, it does technically take place at Christmas. And there are a lot of parallels to the probably most famous Christmas story of all time, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens.
It's a little light on the Christmas.
It's a little light on the Christmas.
Christmas comes and goes in the story.
It does. In this story, kind of, the whole structure of this story is a group of friends who gather at an estate to celebrate Christmas and the New Year. So they're here together for at least a week, if not 2 weeks. The story starts before Christmas, so probably like 2 weeks. All these rich people, rich socialites.
This sounds like a rich person thing to do.
Kind of upper crusty, important people types.
What nationality was Alcott?
Louisa May Alcott was American.
Okay, because this is also, I feel like, a very rich English person thing to do.
Well, it is, and I do think this story is set in England because we've got a Sir. And they talk about some of the characters were in France for a time.
There's an abbey.
There's an abbey.
That's, like, ancient. So, yeah, it would have to take place in Europe.
Yeah, it definitely took place, like, it doesn't really specify. But yeah, it's a very rich thing. It's like, oh, it's Christmas time. So they get all their friends to come.
Because I did notice she used American spellings.
She does. And I did notice that when reading her other short stories, she has a lot of very different settings. I mean, you know, as a writer, I respect. She's probably using that kind of as exploration without traveling, right?
Yeah, why not?
Not only, so the story is very light on the Christmas. Christmas does happen, and something very important happens on Christmas. It's kind of in the background. The forefront of this story is drama. Interpersonal drama. You know, Octavia is in love with Maurice, but doesn't quite know it yet. Maurice is in love with Octavia. Aemon is in love with Octavia. Octavia's mother wants her to marry Aemon and not Maurice. And then you've got Mrs. Snowdon, Edith, who is coming to visit, who used to date Maurice. Well, used to associate with Maurice in Paris. It's kind of implied that they hooked up. Also present is Jasper, Octavia's brother. Maurice's cousin, yeah. Cousin/friend, who also had a thing with Edith, Mrs. Snowdon, in Paris.
This is already too much.
I know, it's the number, like, when you're writing a short story now, as a modern writer, one of the main things, keep it simple.
This is not simple.
It's not simple.
There's too many characters.
There are too many characters to the point where, so there's Aemon, who's in love with Octavia, who's one of the friends that was invited to spend the Christmas and New Year's time at this estate. I confused him with another character called the Major, to the point where I thought they were the same person until the very end. That is how confused I was. Because the Major doesn't do much.
I was gonna say, was he even really necessary in the story?
Most of the people in this story are not necessary.
The Major could, I think, have been cut out.
And then there's the General, who is an older gentleman who Edith married. So Edith is like 30.
You said she's not quite 30.
She's not quite 30. Yeah, she's older than the Octavia and Octavia's friends.
But it should be noted that Edith is very beautiful.
She's beautiful.
She's extremely desirable. But she's married to this older general, and I thought it was kind of interesting to note, because when she's talking about her marriage to the general, it was kind of a marriage of, I don't really want to say convenience, but
charity almost.
Yeah, right. Because this, of course, is a time period where women don't have a whole lot of rights.
Yeah.
Not being married would put you, especially at her, because she is approaching 30.
Basically a spinster.
Not being married at her age would be very disadvantageous.
Well, yeah, and then Edith's father died.
Right, that was the thing that made the general propose.
Yeah, so the general was friends with Edith's father.
Because Edith now is without her father. He basically would have been... You couldn't be a woman in this time period without a man.
Whether it was a brother or a husband or a father.
Right, and now because she's alone, which is why the general proposed to her so she could marry him, he's another patronly figure to her.
Yeah.
And he marries her so he can take care of her so she's not alone in the world.
Not so much like a sexual thing or whatever. He's literally just like, I was friends with this girl's father. He's dead now. She is nobody. Let's get married. And she'll be my company because I'm old.
And she'll be taken care of because she's got no rights in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's Edith and the general. Jasper is Octavia's brother, Maurice's cousin, and also a past fling of Mrs. Snowdon, Edith, who is the general's wife. And then we've got two friends of Octavia who come to visit, who are Rose and Blanche. They never really give them an age, but presumably they're like 1920-ish. Compared to Edith's, like, high 20s.
Yeah, because we get Edith's view on Octavia a little bit, and she refers to Octavia as pure and innocent.
And a girl, and
yeah, she's definitely younger.
And then we've got Octavia and Jasper's mother, who is the lady of the house. And then there's some...
And the text kept referring to her as my lady.
Yes!
Without any... Because it wasn't in a dialogue tag or anything, it was just my lady. I was like, whose lady is this?
Yeah, it actually... I picked up on that too. And it's actually kind of creepy then, because you're like, who's telling the story?
I did not like that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was probably just incongruous. But if you wrote it the right way, you could definitely have that be a twist. Who's the narrator? It was the ghost, or whatever.
That would have been good.
That would have been good.
That's not what happened.
Louisa May Alcott, take notes. That's our cast of characters, and there's some servants, blah, blah, blah. Who cares about the servants?
Well, the ghost does.
The ghost does. Everyone in this story is in love with somebody else. They're all kind of crisscross, complicated, twisted webs. And the story is named after the Abbot's ghost, who he does not come into play until, like, midway through the story, if not more than halfway through. It doesn't even get mentioned.
One of the servants screams, and everyone hears the scream, and they're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then she tells them that she saw a ghost. And then, I think it's Jasper.
Yeah, he
gives us the whole backstory about how the manor that they're in used to be an abbey, and then it was bought up, and all of the brothers were kicked out, and one of them swore vengeance. And then I thought this was really funny, and then he died as soon as he could.
Yes.
In order to get started.
I also thought that was, yeah.
But you know, it was really interesting. He said that part of the building, most of the abbey I got the impression, was torn down.
Yeah, except for
part
a couple
of it,
pieces.
The chapel and the gallery are from the original abbey, and I thought that was kind of interesting because they did that in Europe when building castles.
Yeah.
Not necessarily with abbeys. During the Renaissance, at least in France, because that's where I was when I learned this, you would have your medieval castle, right? And the medieval castles were basically fortresses. And they were placed at strategic places.
Defense.
And they were supposed to be defendable. But then during the Renaissance, you had these kings who were building castles just to be pretty and to live in. Well, what they would do sometimes is, even though the original medieval castle would either be decrepit or torn down, they would keep part of it and incorporate it into the Renaissance design. So one of the castles that I went to in France, Villandry, had a tower from the original medieval castle.
Okay, yeah.
But all the rest of it was Renaissance.
So that tracks.
So that was what I thought of with that. I was like, oh, that makes sense. So they would keep part of the original building and then rebuild the rest of it.
But so the titular ghost, it takes so long to appear, and then, we find out, so he's, the abbot, is like, I'm gonna haunt you until the end of your line, essentially, until there are no more. And so then the story is that anytime the abbot appears to somebody, they die. And it's always a male figure of the house. The women folk are fine. They're innocent. They've done no wrong. He only appears to men folk, and anyone he appears to passes away. So that's where the ghost comes in.
Yeah, but we have a long way before we even get there.
Yeah.
Because the story opens up setting up the drama. It starts off with, I think it's Jasper and I'm gonna call him Frank, the friend, they're talking about Octavia.
Yeah.
And they're talking about Maurice.
Mm-hmm.
And they're already kind of being like, well, I'm gonna win Octavia's heart. And he's
No, it's
not.
Eamon.
His first name is Frank.
Is it really?
Yes.
That was another thing. Like, they only basically refer to him as Eamon. Is it Frank?
How it goes, Frank. It's in the first line.
God damn it. Like, this story, like, it's...
Yeah.
There's...
Anon.
Okay. I'm saying his name wrong, too. That's the problem with this story. That's my biggest problem with the story, is it is so short. The amount of characters in it, it's so confusing. And the way she refers to them changes. Because most of the story...
Oh, it's not even Jasper in the scene. It's the Major. Okay, so the Major does nothing throughout the story, but he's in this opening.
He's just there to confuse me.
Yeah.
He's so irrelevant. The only time he's relevant is at the very end, because he marries one of the people.
In the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he and Frank... I thought it was really funny, because first I was like, oh, Anon, is she trying to do this so she can avoid giving him a real name? But his first name is Frank. Which is... Frank, I feel like that's such like a mid-century name.
Yeah, it also reminds me of MASH. Frank Burns.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
That's what the name Frank usually reminds me
well,
of.
they were talking about Jasper, Maurice, and Octavia. And we learned that Maurice saved Jasper's life, but in doing so, he became paralyzed.
Yes, he's in a wheelchair. Somebody more educated than I on this subject would have to comment on it, but Maurice's condition of being paralyzed and in this wheelchair, having saved Jasper's life, I feel like that was romanticized to a bit of a weird degree. I feel like the disability rep in this story could probably leaves much to be desired.
Well, here's the thing. We kept being told about it over and over and over. Every time Maurice talked to someone, I was like, oh, you poor thing, you can't walk. Oh, you poor thing, you're in the witch. Like, we were constantly told, this is a misfortune.
Yes. There was that, and it made me feel kind of weird about it. You know, and the way Octavia treats him is like, you know, she's basically his nursemaid. And that's how she grows to love him, is like, oh, she loves to take care of him. And that's kind of a discourse in the book of, oh, women love to nurse somebody. In this story, it kind of serves as a physical representation of the moral and ethical quandary, which we'll get to.
Okay.
But the other thing I want to draw attention to with Maurice in the wheelchair is Tiny Tim. This story isn't a direct retelling of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol by any means. I would say this is definitely more dramatized. This is much more kind of, oh, come for the tea. Here's a bit of a moral lesson, I guess. Maurice is absolutely kind of a Tiny Tim figure. And then you've got Edith Snowden, who is kind of the Scrooge character in the sense that she comes in, she's very beautiful, and everyone comments on that, and, you know, she's married to the general who's old and infirm, and everyone's like, oh, what a doting wife, she's gonna take care of him, whatever. And she's kind of plotting, she's got schemes. She has this past relationship with both Maurice and Jasper, and she's got these machinations that she's working on. So she's portrayed kind of like a villain almost, and then she has a change of heart, like Scrooge.
And hers isn't quite as,
not as dramatic.
It doesn't take as much.
No. There are definite parallels, and I don't know if I would have drawn those parallels if it wasn't a Christmas ghost story. You know what I mean?
That's true.
But Christmas Carol is the Christmas ghost story. So the story is called The Abbot's Ghost, or Maurice's Temptation. It's a very odd title. I guess the temptation is Octavia.
Well, let's get back to the plot then. We open the story with the Major and Frank Anon talking about Jasper and Maurice. And we're given a lot of information. Maurice saved Jasper's life, and that's how he came to be in the wheelchair.
Mm.
And very importantly, Jasper's father, right?
Yes, Jasper's father.
Was supposed to split his inheritance between Jasper and Maurice. Jasper was meant to get the title and the estate, and Maurice was supposed to get money. But ultimately, when the father died, Jasper got everything, and no one's really sure why Maurice got cut out of the will.
Nobody except for Maurice and Jasper. That's kind of the big mystery at the heart of this story.
Yeah, and everyone's wondering about it because Maurice is portrayed as a really... Everyone seems to like him.
Upstanding.
He's not disliked by anyone.
He's described as being very handsome. He's a very responsible, respectable gentleman. And Jasper, on the other hand, is portrayed kind of as like a rakish figure. He's a little irresponsible, a little not as respectable and upstanding. Like he's more of the rake.
Right. So the fact that Maurice basically has nothing, in addition to not having his health, so to speak, he's just got everything that could be going wrong for him is going wrong.
The one thing he has is Octavia, his cousin / girlfriend.
But Frank is gonna fight for her affection.
Octavia and Jasper's mother wants Octavia to marry Frank because he has money and position, essentially. And Maurice has...
And 2 working legs.
And Maurice does not have his health. He does not have titles. He does not have wealth. So she's like, Maurice, I love you. You're great. You saved my son's life. However, I don't want my daughter to marry you.
And how does Octavia feel about this?
And Octavia definitely wants to marry her cousin. Hates Frank.
I want to say she hates him, but she doesn't love him.
I think she says, we're friends.
Yeah, she does. She has this whole little speech where she says that I don't love you. I don't think I could love you. This part made me really frustrated where Frank is like, well, but you could learn to.
Yeah, that's like a bit of a thing in these, especially in society, right? Where there's a lot of marriage of convenience or marriage for the exchange of land, titles, power, whatever. The idea is very repugnant to us because we don't live in that society anymore. Well, and I also think because, again, Louisa May Alcott was American. She wrote for American Penny Dreadful type magazines. You look at this from a sense of she's writing for kind of probably a middle-class American audience. They want the drama of this British aristocracy.
Oh, well, you could learn to. That's how marriages end in resentment.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely. Of course, we can end marriages nowadays. That was not a right that women had back in the day.
Oh, no.
Divorce was not a thing. So Octavia's like, well, I'll try. I'll give it a whirl.
Yeah. Even when she talks to Frank, she's like, well, give me until New Year.
Yeah.
And then I'll decide.
Yeah. And he's like, okay. So that's Octavia. And so then our other guests, we've talked about Edith, Mrs. Snowden, and the General. And we have the characters Rose and Blanche, who are friends of Octavia's. They're in Octavia's age range. They're just 2 single women who came to mingle.
Yeah, they're mostly here, I think, to make the ending happy.
Yeah, they exist so that everyone marries somebody and gets a happily ever after. And they have machinations of their own, but they're very minor and don't end up mattering.
Did we mention that everyone is in love with Maurice?
Oh, yeah, everyone's in love. Yeah, so Octavia's in love with Maurice. Edith is in love with Maurice. I forget which one, Rose or Blanche, is in love with Maurice. I think it's Rose.
This guy must really have something going for him.
Yeah.
He's got no money.
Yep.
No job that we know of, because he's got no titles, right?
Yeah.
He owns nothing. He lives with his aunt. He's ill.
Yeah.
Whatever this guy's got, like, he must just have either the best personality ever, or he's gorgeous.
And you know
or
what?
Both.
Having read the book, he must be gorgeous.
Yeah, his personality was a little...
Yeah, I mean, not my thing. Maybe other people.
Did anyone really have a lot of personality?
Well, that's the other thing. The story is so short, and there are so many characters that they're all just kind of...
I feel like most of Maurice's interactions with everyone was just kind of like, oh, okay.
Yeah, basically. Other main character, the peacocks. Octavia has these peacocks that come up a couple times and end up being important to the plot. We've got Maurice. Edith, Octavia, and Rose all want Maurice. You've got Jasper. Jasper is still in love with Edith, who is in love with Maurice. I believe it's Blanche wants Jasper.
It's too many people. We've got I don't even know what shape this is.
No, it's not even...
How many sides
It's
have
not
we
a
got?
shape. It's like when you put nails in a board and then wind string around them. It's like that kind of art.
Oh, yeah.
So Frank wants Octavia. But then I think Rose or Blanche is flirting with him. It's very confusing. the general is just kind of there, and he basically is there.
I felt kind of bad for him.
I did,
because there is a scene where he overhears the servants talking about Jasper and Edith kind of whispering to each other. And it says he walks away with his head hanging.
Mm-hmm.
It describes him as old and gray, and I just kind of felt bad for him. Because in that moment, like, it says, like, he understood Edith doesn't love him. He's just uncle to her, basically.
Yeah. I felt like he existed just so Edith could be a bit of a villain for the first half of the story.
Yeah.
Because, you know, she's plotting with Jasper, she's plotting with Maurice, she's trying to win Maurice back, and using Jasper's love of her to get blackmail on Maurice, because she wants to make it so Maurice cannot marry Octavia, so that then when Edith's husband dies, they can end up together.
Yeah, you know what she accused him of being?
A
Gambler. You know what I was thinking about? That was very reminiscent of Valancourt and Udolpho.
Yes.
Where Emily was told that Valancourt had become a gambler and squandered everything away, but then it turned out that he was just covering for some of his friends, which was a similar scenario in the story.
Almost exactly the same, actually. I guess we should cut to the interesting part.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of uninteresting things that happen. We've explained the characters, we've explained the way that they're all in love with each other. Well, everyone's in love with Maurice, and some of the other ones are in love with some of the other ones.
Yeah.
And they've all kind of got their ideas and schemes to end up with the person they want to end up with.
So Edith tries to blackmail Maurice by telling him, I know that you gambled in Paris. And he basically says, well, go ahead.
Yeah. Tell him.
Because he's got some other secrets. And he's sworn to hold them. And he, rather than, I guess, betray the trust that these people have in him. Because we're not told what it is.
No.
Right away. We're told that he's sworn to secrecy about something. But not what it is. So he tells Edith that he would rather be alone forever than to betray whoever this is.
That trust.
And that's where it's not where she has her change of heart, but it's where that scene starts to happen.
Yeah, so then Octavia comes out to speak to Edith. Previously, Octavia was kind of low-key a little like, who is this lady, this pretty lady who's coming in and trying to talk to my cousin and blah, 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 who I'm in love with. Which is probably normal for the time and circumstances, but it's very weird for us as a modern audience.
The fact they were cousins, because of all this other stuff going on, you could overlook it.
You could. But it kept sticking out, like, they kept using the word cousins.
Yeah.
And it's a little off-putting as a 2024 modern audience. Octavia comes out with a bunch of roses to give to Edith. And she's like, oh, it's Christmas Eve, I just wanted to embody the spirit of the season and, you know, beg your forgiveness and turn over a new leaf for the new year. I'm sorry I was such a bitch and blah, blah, blah.
But Octavia has no idea about the stuff that happened between Edith and Maurice.
Nothing. Yeah, nada.
What Edith acknowledges, but because Octavia is so innocent and pure, that's what makes her change her mind.
Yes, Octavia comes out with this very honest, very pure declaration of wanting to make amends, and that melts Edith's frozen, cold heart, and she has a change of heart. We're best friends now. I love you like a sister. And it's kind of like that scene in The Grinch where his heart grows 3 sizes and it breaks the little measurer scale thing. Again, going back to the Ebenezer Scrooge comparison, she has this change of heart after being taught a lesson. Granted, this lesson was much shorter than the 3 ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future that visit Ebenezer Scrooge. All it took was one cute, innocent girl to...
And a bunch of roses.
And a bunch of roses. The lesson there is to be sincere. And it works, I guess.
Yeah. You may be wondering at this point, where does the ghost come in?
Yes. And if you read the story, you will wonder that for much of it. The Abbot...
The point with Edith is about halfway through. Because that's where I stopped reading it, because I was too tired to continue.
Yeah, so basically, the Abbot's ghost comes in. One of the servants is going into this big hall that only gets used for rare occasions for a big dance party.
Right, and notably, it's part of what was the original abbey.
Yes. So the servant goes in there to make sure the fires are all lit and everything's ready for the rich folk to come in and dance. And there's a black cloaked figure that rises from the shadows, and she gets all freaked out. So she turns to leave, and then there's the cloaked figure is right behind her in front of the door, and oh my god, and so she screams, makes a bunch of ruckus, runs away, has a fit. I think literally the word has a fit came up.
I think that phrasing was used quite a bit in this era.
It was, yeah. And so everyone in the house hears her scream, and so, they get the story, and that's how we learned about the Abbot's ghost. Jasper tells the whole story. And then it doesn't come up again.
No, yeah, and I had mentioned this earlier when we talked about how Jasper gave the backstory. But it took a long time for us to get to the ghost.
The ghost comes back around. Well, no, we have to talk about Christmas first.
Okay.
Christmas Eve happens.
And it's a big party.
It's a big party, and everyone's flirting and dancing and having a good time except for Maurice, who is by the fire in his wheelchair. So Octavia is like, I don't care what my mother says. I know she wants me to marry Frank, but I don't love Frank. I'm going to go talk to Maurice.
Her cousin
that she wants to marry. So she goes over by the fire with him, and they're talking, and she's like, oh, you don't have any holly? Because that was a thing. All the non-wheelchair bound members of this party went out and picked holly, and they've adorned themselves. Very festive. So she's like, oh, let me get you some holly. So she reaches up on top of the mantle to break off some of the greenery to give to Maurice, but she leans too close to the fire, and all of a sudden she's engulfed in flames.
A common problem in the era. Now, see, this was written in, the 1860s?
Yes.
So this is the era of the hoop skirt, and especially if you're going to a party, you'd be decked out. So probably very wide.
Very wide.
Skirt.
Lots of fabric, lots of layers.
Prone to catching fire in the fireplace.
Yeah, so she catches on fire, and wheelchair-bound Maurice is obviously the closest, and he's like, oh my god. So he springs up out of the chair. It's a Christmas miracle. And he saves her life, wraps her up in his blanket, and, douses the flames. And so all of a sudden, he's healed.
It is a Christmas miracle.
It is a Christmas miracle. So he has this miraculous recovery. And now it isn't like an overnight thing, what they do in between Christmas and New Year's. He's doing exercises and walking around and to make sure he doesn't lose this or go back to being paralyzed.
But should be noted that the fact he was paralyzed was one of the marks against him for winning the favor of Octavia's parents.
Yeah, so essentially...
But now suddenly he can walk again, so he's gained a point on the marriage tally.
So that's very exciting. He's working on this to regain his strength. He's like, I'm gonna be able to marry Octavia. But so then New Year's Eve rolls around, and it's 10 o'clock at night. Maurice is in his room sulking or doing whatever. The rest of the party are all bored. They're like, oh, we gotta kill time before midnight. What do we do? And they're like, oh, we need Maurice here. Maurice is the one with all the good ideas. So they send a note to have Maurice come down. He's like, nah. And they're like, well, we need him, though. Nobody else can come up with anything to do. They send Frank/Anon, who is not the major, and Jasper. They're like, well, you boys go get him. Surely he'll come down. And don't come back unless you have him. So then they come back empty-handed. And Rose, very comically, is like, you are such freaking cowards. How dare you come back into my presence? Iconic. They can't get him down. And they're like, I know, Octavia, you write a note. He'll come down for you. So then she writes a note, and predictably, he's like, oh, Octavia wrote me a letter, I guess I'll come down. So he comes down, he's like, oh, what can I do for you? And they go, we're bored. What do we do? And he's like, well, we could tell ghost stories. And everyone treats this like a revelation. Oh my god, you were brilliant. What an amazing idea. We needed you for this, Maurice.
You know what it is? It's because they didn't have a campfire.
No, that's true. They had to go into a room and circle up around a fireplace and douse all the other lights so it would be spooky enough to tell ghost stories. So then we get a bunch of ghost stories. There's one that Maurice tells from when he was in India.
Of course it's Maurice, because Maurice is the one with the best ideas, the best stories.
Yes, and notably, I think his is the only actual ghost story, because he talks about there was a Scottish fellow that he was friends with, and then, this Scottish fellow goes out somewhere, and then his horse comes back without him, and nobody knows where he is, and he he has this vision of the Scotsman coming into his tent and grabbing his hand, and then his hand is all cold. He has this prophetic dream where he finds the guy's dead body in a river. He ends up following this whim across India until finally he finds the dead Scotsman in a river. And to this day, the hand that the Scotsman touched is cold and small. And it's literally described in the book as he shows them his hands, and his left hand is indeed colder and smaller than the right hand.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Sure. I don't remember what order it goes in. And Rose tells a story about how she and Blanche, because they're sisters, they go to their grandmother's house and her grandmother is sick and keeps seeing a ghost. You know, oh, if I see the ghost again, it'll be my death and blah, blah, blah. And so then they set out to prove the ghost isn't real. And it turns out to be Blanche sleepwalking.
Point of this is foreshadowing?
Yes, so basically...
Or Alcott just getting an excuse to write ghost stories within her ghost story.
So they tell these ghost stories, and most of them aren't super interesting. And then we get to Edith, and now Edith and Octavia, remember, are now best buds. They're sitting at the fire, and Edith is on a couch, and Octavia is on a little footstool, resting her head against Edith's knee in a very Little Women-esque fantasy. Like, I feel like that's a common image with, like, Victorian women, right? So, and then Edith is like, I've got a story for you. She basically tells the story of this whole party. How there was a woman who came to a house with friends, and they've all got plots and machinations and little love ideas, and this woman is haunted by past deeds and past loves, and she's gonna do all these bad things to get the man she wants, but then she has a change of heart because this beautiful, pure, innocent angel comes to her with goodwill and changes her mind, and everyone knows that it's about them.
I was gonna say, that's not a ghost story, that's just her telling her life.
Yeah, so, and everybody knows that she's talking about them. And so, and she tells them, she reveals that the servant who saw the abbot's ghost was not a real ghost. It was her and Jasper plotting.
What a twist.
What a twist.
Who didn't see that coming?
And she's like, I'll prove it to you. We'll go up there and I'll show you how we did it. So they go up to the old abbey where the abbot's ghost was found. And they're gonna, and she and Jasper are gonna reenact the whole thing for everybody. But then they get up there, and actually, there is a ghost.
About time.
Yeah. And so then the abbot's ghost is up there, and he's obviously at the other end of the hall, and it's a full moon, completely dark. So you've only got moonlight streaming through these big gothic abbey windows. And so the ghost approaches them, and as it gets closer, each time it crosses in front of a window, they get a little more detail, and they can see he's got these long black robes. Yeah, he's got a rosary, and he gets closer and closer, and then Edith, steps forward to meet him, and he's got this inhuman, ghastly, pale, skeletal, horrifying face, and she falls to the floor, overcome with terror.
That's not very Christian of him.
No. He points his skeletal, ghostly corpse finger at Jasper, and then vanishes. And everyone is like, oh my god, Jasper, you're gonna die, you're gonna fall to the abbot's curse. Jasper's like, that's kind of creepy, I don't like that. But then the next day, he's like, you know what, I don't believe in this stuff. I'm gonna go about my life, I'm gonna do my thing, I'm gonna have a good time. I'm not gonna let this stop me. I'm here for a good time, not a long time. But everyone is super worried, especially, Jasper's sister and mother. So everyone's kind of babysitting him, and he gets really frustrated with it. And he's like, I'm gonna go take a horseback ride. And they're trying to convince him, no, let me come with you. No, why don't you come in the carriage with me? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like, nah. You can't babysit me forever. Whatever happens, happens. I don't believe in this shit. I'm gonna go by myself. So he takes his horse out. And as the reader, you're like, oh man, he's never coming back. Because I kind of thought at this point, this was after we got all those ghost stories, so I thought maybe we'd get a mirror of Maurice's story about his friend in India who went for a horseback ride and never came back. Yeah. So in my head, I'm like, oh, that's going to happen again. And then Maurice's right hand will be as cold and small as the other one.
Oh, well.
Lo and behold, Jasper comes back. And Octavia and her mother are kind of pacing, waiting for him. They're very anxious, and they see him coming. So they're waving to him. They're very happy to see him, and he comes over to say hi to them. And the way this was described, I was a little confused about, and this might have been a me problem, but they described, he would have dismounted at this previous, other point, but because his sister and mother were on the balcony, he comes over to the steps to dismount and see them. And as this is happening, as he's moving to get off his horse, Octavia's peacocks get startled by something, so they make this big racket. So the horse gets startled, rears, and Jasper is part way done dismounting. They take a tumble on the icy, snowy ground, and the horse crushes Jasper. And so everyone is now extremely upset. They're trying to get the doctor in. They're trying to save Jasper's life. Cannot be saved. And so he's on his deathbed after all this has happened. And he's like, everyone gather round. I have a tale to tell. I must clear my conscience before I die. So we get the whole story from him about him and Jasper in Paris. And the dirt, the blackmail that Edith dug up was not that Maurice was the gambler, but Jasper was the gambler.
That's quite the twist.
And to pay off some massive gambling debts, he forges this, like, money order check from his father. And he and Maurice, are like, okay, we're gonna pay off Jasper's debts. Jasper's father finds out, and he thinks that it's Maurice's debts and Maurice's doing. Which is why he strips Maurice of the money and everything he was going to get in his will.
The irony.
Yep. And so then Jasper finds out about this, and he's like, oh, I got to go tell my dad the truth, because I don't want my dear cousin BFF Maurice to take the blame for my sins. But then by the time he gets home, his father's already dead.
That was fast.
Yeah, so then he and Maurice, now at this point, on the way back from Paris for Jasper to confront his father, is when the accident happens where Maurice saves Jasper's life, but then becomes paralyzed. Maurice is like, hey man, that's fine. Nobody else knows about this. We'll just keep it our secret. I'm already paralyzed, so if anyone finds out, it's whatever. It's fine. Not only saved Jasper's life and became paralyzed physically, but also bore the repercussions of Jasper's gambling and lost the money and any sort of title or anything he had from his father figure. So Jasper clears the air, tells everyone the truth, and then he turns to Edith and he's like, yeah, I know you were using me to get to Maurice, but I still actually love you, so give me a kiss before I die. So then Edith gives him a little kiss, and then he's like, all right, and now, Mother, let Maurice and Octavia marry. It's the least you can do. And she's like, okay, cool. And he's like, all right. And then he dies. And then, a few months later, we get a happy ending where Maurice and Octavia get married. Anon and Blanche get married. Frank. And then the Major and Rose get married. And this is the point. I'm literally on the last page of the book, and I go, wait, I thought the Major and Anon were the same person.
No, they were
not the same person. And Edith has found new happiness and joy in being with her decrepit uncle, husband, father person.
The general.
And so then that's the Abbot's ghost.
Well, like we said before, Christmas came and went.
This story is, like, technically a Christmas story, but it has nothing to do with it.
It's like when people say Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Like, it takes place at Christmas, but it's not.
It's not about Christmas.
Necessarily. There was just so many different elements in the story. I don't think we really needed most of them.
No.
But here's the thing. That's what makes it, I think, quintessentially gothic. Is because it is so mellow, dramatic.
What?
You have all these really complicated relationships. Everyone's problems could be solved if they just told the truth. Well, Jasper would have still had problems. That's why he didn't confess till he was about to die.
Yeah, but then, because he let someone else take the fall for his sins, he was duly punished for it.
We had a supernatural element.
We did, and it was very
ghost.
With the good versus evil. I mean, I feel like good and evil in this story is a little bit blurred, but...
Good and vice.
Yes, essentially. People who committed the sins either repented or were punished, or both.
And the upstanding, good people, the ones who took the fall, took the blame for others, protected the dignity of others, were all around good friends, neighbors, and cousins, had the happy ending.
They did.
This is, I think, just characteristic of stories from the 19th century. The ending in a marriage.
Yes, the happily ever after.
But a lot of gothics also end in a marriage.
They do.
Or a marriage happens at some point in them.
Yeah, which I think is very indicative of societal norms at the time, especially for women. Oh my good golly gracious.
Yeah, it was a nice little melodrama we had there.
Compared to other Gothic stories we've read, this is definitely more, I think, fun. Like, it's very melodramatic, but it's told in a way where it's not so life and death, even though there is...
Except for Jasper.
Yeah, except for Jasper. But...
I can't say, because it wasn't... I don't want to say this. Because most of the story was not that dire, Jasper's death was a little bit of a surprise.
It was. Well, even when Octavia caught on fire, it was literally like 2 sentences. She caught on fire and then it was put out immediately.
But that was also like, oh my goodness.
Like, it came out of nowhere and then it was resolved. And I mean, it is a short story, but because there were so many characters, I do think it almost keeps you from taking it seriously, because part of you is just confused about what's going on. And so much of the story is, well, this person wants to get with that person. So it's kind of like just a gossipy, fun kind of time.
Yeah. And it takes place at Christmas, so...
It does. I mean, I do think Louisa May Alcott, she's very readable. But substantial, maybe not. Fun, though. It's fun.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to read about messy people doing messy things.
Uh-huh.
And ghosts.
Oh yeah, you gotta have a ghost.
Gotta have a ghost.
And if you don't have ghosts, you have to have vampires.
That's true. So yeah, so that was that. Stay tuned. Next episode will be the second part of our Nights at the Circus analysis. And after that, you'll just have to stay tuned.
That's right.
Happy Boxing Day. Happy holidays, whatever you celebrate or don't celebrate. We love you regardless.
Have a good time all around.
Yes.
Okay, bye.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. I was gonna pull out the Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night, but then that would go against the non-denominational sign off.
Yeah. Also, this will be coming out after Christmas.
Yeah. So have a good day. Talk to you later. Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.